Mr. Speaker. Meeting of Parliament, Thursday, 22nd of November 2018. Order of proceedings. Suspension of standing orders. The Honourable the Chief Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move under Standing Order 7.3 to suspend Standing Order 7.1 in order to proceed with a government statement.
Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Carried.
Mr. Speaker, despite the parallel storm that has been raging on Gibraltar-related matters, I returned yesterday from Madrid with the government's Brexit team, where we have negotiated the final details of the package of measures that will apply to Gibraltar in the context of our withdrawal from the European Union, together with the United Kingdom. This morning, I briefed the Cabinet and the members of the Brexit Select Committee. I expect to make a full ministerial statement to the nation on the nature and effect of these Gibraltar measures sometime next week. By then, we hope, the European Summit to be held on Sunday the 25th of November will have reached final agreement on the draft withdrawal agreement and the political declaration which has just been published and which sets out the framework for the future relationship between the European Union and the United Kingdom. Today, I will update the Parliament on the progress made in this week's negotiations in Madrid and the meeting held with the Prime Minister in Downing Street last week. Mr. Speaker, the withdrawal agreement, as honourable members know, contains a protocol on Gibraltar. The protocol refers to a series of memoranda of understanding and a tax treaty that will underpin the operation of the protocol. Those are the documents that we've been discussing. And I'm glad to report today that agreement on all of these documents is now virtually complete, subject to a common final political agreement. Work has been finalised on negotiations of substance in respect of all matters. The 4 MOUs concern citizens' rights, tobacco market access, cooperation on environmental matters, and cooperation on police and customs matters. The tax treaty sets out provisions on fiscal transparency and tax residency rules, typical of what is found in a double taxation or information exchange agreement, those types of agreements that we have with many countries around the world and which we have long wished to have with Spain, Mr. Speaker. All of these MOUs, except for the tax treaty and the citizens' rights MOU, create obligations only until the end of December 2020. That is to say, Mr. Speaker, these agreements are only for the 21 months of the so-called transition period between March 2019 and December 2020. Unless we agree otherwise, they drop dead then. All of these documents are the product of a long and intensive negotiation that has lasted virtually the whole year. Nothing in these documents compromises any of our red lines. Nothing in them alters in any way whatsoever our constitution and our constitutional competences. There are and there will be no concessions on matters of sovereignty, jurisdiction, or control. In fact, they are expressly arrangements entered into without prejudice to all sovereignty positions. Indeed, neither do these documents require us to do things that we have any problem in doing. I can assure all members that the terms of the MOUs are far removed from what others might have wished them to contain. Mr. Speaker, we're now presently engaged in a legal scrub and text stabilization of the documents and the necessary translation of them, and we're confident that they will be ready for final political agreement and approval by Sunday. This means that as long as the Special European Summit on Sunday reaches final agreement between the EU 27 and the United Kingdom, the terms on which Gibraltar will form part of the withdrawal agreement have been finalized, and Gibraltar will benefit from the transition period. This is what was at stake at this stage of the complex Brexit negotiations, and this is what we are on the verge of achieving. Mr. Speaker, our objective for the first phase of the Brexit negotiations was to secure continued access to the UK market. We achieved that in October last year. we're now on the verge of securing our objective for the second phase of the Brexit negotiations. That is to say, our inclusion in the withdrawal agreement and the transitional period. It is of critical importance that we bear in mind that without our inclusion in the withdrawal agreement, Gibraltar alone would have faced a cliff edge on the 30th of March 2019. That is to say, Mr. Speaker, EU law would have continued to apply to the United Kingdom for a transitional period running to at least December 2020, but not to Gibraltar. Mr. Speaker, this was not the result we would have wanted. It would provide no certainty to businesses and to individuals. It is therefore with a great sense of satisfaction that I am able to inform the House today that notwithstanding the threats that we have faced, notwithstanding the considerable challenges that we have faced, notwithstanding the claims that some voices have wrongly suggested that Brexit presented Spain with the best opportunity it had in the last 300 years to acquire sovereignty, or some part of it, over Gibraltar, Gibraltar will nonetheless, and despite all of that, be part of any withdrawal agreement and transitional period, if there is one. This will secure, Mr. Speaker, a vital period of legal certainty for businesses and citizens that will last until at least the 31st of December 2020, and during which the future partnership between the United Kingdom, including Gibraltar, and the EU will be negotiated. The Memorandums of Understanding and the Tax Treaty will be accompanied by a number of other documents, letters and political declarations, all of which are also being finalized as I speak. All of these documents form a single package that must be read and understood as such. I will explain them in some detail in my ministerial statement once they have all been finalized and the EU27 and the UK have reached an agreement on the withdrawal process. There are two additional points I would like to make, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, during the course of this week, the Spanish government has publicly expressed its misgivings with how Gibraltar has been treated in relation to one aspect of the withdrawal agreement. This concerns Article 184 of the agreement, which Spain interprets as compromising the role it wishes to play in determining how the UK's future partnership with the EU will apply to Gibraltar. Let it be clear that this has nothing to do with what we have been negotiating, which is the terms of the differentiated involvement in the withdrawal agreement for Gibraltar and our inclusion in the transitional period, and not the terms of the future relationship with the EU. That is not what we are dealing with at this point. Indeed, those who have criticized the Gibraltar government for not having obtained now a more enduring and permanent deal for Gibraltar at this stage of the negotiations continue to profoundly misunderstand how the Brexit negotiations are being conducted and how the legal text must be interpreted. Perhaps the events of the last 72 hours may have served to clarify this. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the memorandums and the tax treaty we have been negotiating underpin the operation of the Gibraltar Protocol that forms an integral part of the withdrawal agreement. They're therefore the product of requirements contained in the withdrawal agreement. That agreement is an EU treaty, which is a formally binding treaty under international law entered into by sovereign states. Gibraltar is constitutionally not and constitutionally cannot be a separate party to such an agreement. This said, it is important that the protocol and the MOUs are understood in the light of recital 2 of the protocol, which states that the protocol is to be implemented in accordance with the respective constitutional orders of the United Kingdom and Spain. This recognizes that the rights and obligations set out in the protocol and the memorandums are enjoyed and performed by the Gibraltar government in accordance with the terms of our constitution. This much was specifically confirmed in my meeting with the Prime Minister in Downing Street last week. Therefore, nothing has been imposed on us and nothing will be done which is not in accordance with our constitution. All the commitments entered into, whether under the protocol or the MOUs, concerning Gibraltar have been negotiated by Gibraltar and the United Kingdom together. They are commitments entered into only as a result of the consent of the Cabinet of Her Majesty's Government of Gibraltar having been expressly given. The government is the guardian of the Constitution as much as this legislature or the judiciary may be. We would not have countenanced agreeing to anything which might have resulted in our constitutional order somehow being compromised. Mr. Speaker, assuming all other hurdles to agreement are therefore surmounted, we must now also start to consider in greater detail what our future relationship with the EU should be after withdrawal. In great measure, that is also a consideration of what we want our relationship to be with Spain, our neighbour, after the departure from the EU. We have never questioned that geographically we access Europe principally through Spain. Our geographic gateway to Europe is Spain. We've therefore more reasons for cooperation and discussion with Spain than we do de facto with any of the other remaining 27 EU nations. So we wish to continue in our discussions about the future, to engage directly with Spain also in the spirit of cooperation and positive engagement we have enjoyed in this withdrawal phase of the negotiations. No one should think that we read any part of the withdrawal agreement in any way that would persuade us to avoid that genuine human and political reality. Nobody needs a veto to bring us to a table. Too often, Mr. Speaker, Gibraltar and its people have been lost behind a fog of international legal theory. At this critical time in Europe's history, Gibraltar can be the strongest foundation stone for a future relationship between the UK and the EU, not a rock on the road to agreement. That is our firm commitment and resolve. Mr. Speaker, as far as we're concerned, Brexit is a bad thing for the whole of Europe. Brexit without an agreement for orderly, agreed withdrawal would be an even worse thing for the whole of Europe. And for us, Mr. Speaker, Brexit is as bad an idea today in reality as it was in theory at the time of the referendum. But for us, Mr. Speaker, it is always best that we stick with Britain despite Brexit. We have stuck with Britain in the past, and we will stick with Britain in the future. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the publication of the memorandums and to debating their content and effect with colleagues in this House, and I will be happy to clarify any parts of my statement that honourable members wish me to clarify today.
The Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, conscious of your warning, we appreciate the indication that we will be permitted an opportunity to respond to the government's statement on the current position as regards Brexit and its impact on Gibraltar. It is important, as Her Majesty's loyal opposition, to reflect on the momentous week in politics both here and in London. Mr. Speaker, whilst we are optimistic and a positive community, there is a growing concern amongst many in our community as to what positive measures have been secured for Gibraltar as a result of this process, for which the Chief Minister and his team are said to have worked day and night on for the last 2 years. Clearly, we all want to achieve the best deal for Gibraltar, and to that extent, of course, the government has had our support in these negotiations. Mr. Speaker, we did not wish to leave the EU, so any deal will be worse than remaining in the EU. Mr. Speaker, the Chief Minister on the 15th of November issued a statement confirming that the #1 priority of the Gibraltar government has been achieved. Namely, the terms of the withdrawal agreement and the transition period will apply to Gibraltar, and that as a consequence, Gibraltar will not crash out of the EU in March 2019. And that things will largely remain as they are until the end of 2020. The Chief Minister also confirmed that the Government of Gibraltar has been fully involved in the negotiations as they affected Gibraltar, whilst also stating that the withdrawal agreement, the Gibraltar Protocol, and the underlying memoranda will come to an end on the 31st of December 2020, of course with the exception to the 2 that the Chief Minister highlighted in his contribution just now. Mr. Speaker, the Chief Minister has been steadfast in his support for Mrs May's efforts and fast to confirm that the deal is good for the UK and therefore Gibraltar as a member of the UK family. Mr. Speaker, the Chief Minister has issued several conclusions. One, that the withdrawal agreement or the deal, subject to the formal agreement and ratification by the EU and the UK, is far better for Gibraltar than crashing out of the EU in 4 months' time. 2, that the protocol contains absolutely no concessions on sovereignty, jurisdiction, and or control. And there are no issues of bilateralism that can cause any concern. 3, there are no matters which in any way change our fundamental position on key issues. Fourthly, the Chief Minister confirmed on the 15th of November that he would expect to make a ministerial statement explaining the protocol and the memoranda this week. He has now confirmed that during the course of next week, those memoranda will be explained in detail to the people in a statement to the nation. In summing up, the Chief Minister confirmed that he was satisfied, and he again repeated that word today, that the aspect of the proposed withdrawal agreement which relates to Gibraltar work for Gibraltar. Mr. Speaker, Her Majesty's opposition provided its initial reaction on the same day, and we stated that it was too early to do a complete evaluation of the impact of the deal on Gibraltar. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the protocol refers to at least 4 UK-Spain memoranda. These have not been published, and we have not been allowed advance copies of these documents, so as to be able to study their content and implications. We understand that there are other documents that the Chief Minister and his team are working on. Therefore, we will need to carefully analyse and evaluate their impact once they are published in full, to assess whether this is the best deal for Gibraltar in all the circumstances, or whether they contain features which are adverse to our interests. Mr. Speaker, we acknowledge that we have had briefings from time to time ahead of all public statements by the Chief Minister. And when the remaining documents are available, we will refer the matter to the party's Brexit policy group to review. Thereafter, Mr. Speaker, we will make a statement on our view of whether this is good or a bad deal for Gibraltar. Mr. Speaker, the latest demands by the Spanish Foreign Minister and Spanish Prime Minister in recent days calling for our exclusion from negotiations as to the UK's future relationship with the EU or the withdrawal agreement until our future relationship has been negotiated bilaterally between the UK and Spain is clearly unacceptable. At best, it reflects Spanish party politics, political electioneering, and playing to Spain's domestic audience, or at worst, it represents more than just an 11th hour spanner in the works. We will all hold our collective breath to see how the next few weeks pans out. There has also been, Mr. Speaker, speculation in Spain whether the government there will table a proposal for joint sovereignty in the context of our exit from the EU and the future relationship. Certainly from these benches opposite, this is entirely unacceptable to the opposition and the people of Gibraltar. Mr. Speaker, the position of the Spanish government raises further concerns as to the Spanish government's commitment to adhere to any agreement over Gibraltar. For now, we will reserve our assessment until such time as the position becomes clearer, but continue to express our misgivings. I am sure that we share the dismay of the whole House that Spain should be seeking to exclude Gibraltar from negotiations on the future relationship with the EU until it gains a political advantage. The government will need to remain vigilant that nothing is changed in the current text of the withdrawal agreement to further undermine Gibraltar's position. Mr. Speaker, we fully appreciate that the withdrawal agreement is temporary in nature in large measure, but we have expressed our initial misgivings about whether the withdrawal agreement, the Gibraltar Protocol, or the 4 memoranda and the tax agreement meets our objectives to lay the ground to secure actual benefits for the people of Gibraltar and our businesses beyond a very short 21-month period. Mr. Speaker, we have also questioned whether Gibraltar has lost time over the last 2 years towards the opportunity of recalibrating our relationship with the EU on a more permanent basis, or whether this set of arrangements represents an intrusion into our affairs by Spain. We await the publication of the documents so that we can make a full evaluation. We think the sooner the government publishes these documents, the better, so that the public can make up their own minds on such issues. We will not rush to judgment on such questions. On another note, Mr. Speaker, there remains a significant concern in our community in relation to our readiness and preparedness for a no-deal Brexit. Mr. Speaker, we have been told that there are detailed contingency plans for all levels of Brexit, and we would appreciate clarity as to what levels of Brexit the government are referring to. Mr. Speaker, we have understood that these are challenging times which on the Chief Minister's own assessment are difficult and dangerous. There have been times in our history where we have faced challenges together, and we have offered to assist the government on Brexit in a spirit of unity. The government has chosen to shoulder the whole burden of this challenge and simply provide the opposition with briefings from time to time. That is their right, and of course that has meant that we have not had any effective ability to participate or influence the shape of these arrangements that we will now have to fully and properly scrutinise once the documents are published. The government has had significant leeway from us and political space to negotiate and conclude these arrangements, which we have given in the best of spirit and in the public interest. Mr. Speaker, there is much political speculation as to whether the Brexit deal, if concluded by the European Council on Sunday, will make it through the British Parliament in December, and the consequences if that were not to happen. We must be ready, Mr. Speaker, for any eventuality in this constantly evolving process. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, there are growing voices in the UK for some people's vote or second referendum. If the Brexit deal does not make it through the Parliament, as things stand, Mr. Speaker, this may look unlikely, but for our part, we have made it clear that if in the UK political dynamic, momentum grows so that there is a vote on either supporting this Brexit deal or remaining in the EU, we would support such a vote. I much suspect that there will be a month ahead of constantly shifting sands in this Brexit debate. We do not set out our stall on this possibility and agree we should be concentrating on the emerging Brexit deal and whether this is ultimately good for the people of Gibraltar.
Chief Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his statement in respect of what I've said to the House today, and I discern a number of points which I think he was asking for my clarification on, so I shall endeavour to provide it as succinctly as I can. Mr. Speaker, yes, there are 4 memoranda which we have not yet published, but I think it is important that honourable members reflect to the whole community that they have seen the memoranda at every stage of their development. They have not been able to take copies away, and I recognise that a full analysis requires one to be able to review the documentation, but members of the Brexit Select Committee have been able to see the documentation. And I have today, during the course of the briefing we have had, informed them that as soon as we have what is known in this business into which we have been thrown as a text stabilization. In other words, when we have the final texts, and we are not at final text yet, it's still being going through legal scrub, as I told the House, we will endeavour to provide it to honourable members immediately, even though that may not be the date of publication, so that they can start doing their assessment. I would have thought, Mr. Speaker, that they have understood now that these are, at the moment, unpublishable texts because they are not yet stable texts. Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman then took us to the issue of the topical Article 3, Article 184 read across in the withdrawal agreement, and the issue of how Spain, in his interpretation, was throwing an 11th hour spanner in the works. And I think it's a reference to a statement that we ourselves issued earlier in the week when the issue first arose. Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the important thing that we need to make clear, I think the message that the government is sending, the message that the whole Parliament is sending, and that we have been sending as a community for many generations, is that Spain does not need a veto to get us to a table. In other words, the 4th largest economy in Europe does not need a whip to get the smallest economy in Europe to sit round a table with it and have a meaningful discussion about cooperation. We genuinely, I think, from all sides of the community believe that as long as we're not talking about issues relating to sovereignty or jurisdiction or control, as long as those things are respected, we yearn for a normal neighbourly relationship, and that those things that would deliver genuine growth and prosperity across the board, not just for Gibraltar but for the whole region, are the things that Gibraltar believes we should be doing to mutual benefit. And so, Mr. Speaker, there is no need for us to be under the cosh of whatever may emerge in the next 48 or 72 hours, or under the cosh of a Clause 24 style reference in negotiating guidelines, to be forced to do that which we wish to do. And I think that is what I discerned from what the Honourable Gentleman said was an element of common ground between us. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman then went on to this issue of whether we had lost an opportunity to recalibrate our future relationship with the European Union. I don't think today is the day for me to tell him that he got things wrong in his understanding of the architecture and structure of the Brexit negotiations. I just refer him to that part of my statement where I made clear that at the instance of the European Union, in June of 2017, I think, now 2 summers back, the EU made very clear that its interpretation of the Article 50 process was that there would be first only a discussion about withdrawal. And only once withdrawal had occurred, a discussion about the future. And so the Honourable Gentleman is saying that we have not been able to achieve that which the United Kingdom has not been able to achieve because it's set out in the interpretation of the Commission and of the Council in Article 50 of the treaty as it is. In other words, you cannot do the recalibration at this stage because we won't allow it. I agree with him, and I think that was a massive mistake on the part of the European Union because it compartmentalized the process of negotiation in a way that was neither good for the United Kingdom and therefore Gibraltar or indeed for the European Union, but that's the real political reality with which the negotiators were faced. And I think, if I may say so, they're sometimes subject to, I think, quite brutal criticism in some sections of the British press and in some parts of the British Parliament. But the negotiators, not the politicians, the officials who have engaged across the floor from each other, who come with parameters given to them, which are in some instances unnegotiable parameters, have done exceedingly well to be able to produce at least a document. Whether you like it more, you like it less, they've produced a document. But that document does not recalibrate the relationship for the future between the United Kingdom and the European Union, because that is what the European Union has said it's not prepared to do. There is now a political declaration that has been published, I think, an hour ago. That political declaration sets out the parameters for the discussion in the future that might lead to that recalibration. And it doesn't mention Gibraltar because it is not mentioning the territorial scope of the discussion that is to be had. The territorial scope is set out in Article 3 as interplayed with Article 184, which is not, in my view, an axe across the territorial scope, but an important reference to who is or is not covered potentially by those discussions, something which the Prime Minister in relation to Gibraltar has made repeatedly clear is inclusive of Gibraltar. But in respect of the recalibration, I think the Honourable Gentleman needs to read again what I said. In terms of preparedness for no deal, Mr. Speaker, we are ready for any potential eventuality. Now, it may sound arrogant for a government to say that, especially the government of a small community, because all of Europe is looking at what happens in the event of no deal. It's not just the United Kingdom that's looking at planning for all eventualities. But of course, there is only one part of Europe, apart from West Berlin, that has had to deal with a blockade in living memory. And so I do not believe that a hard Brexit or no-deal Brexit leads to a blockade. But a lot of the things that we might have wanted to consider doing in such circumstances, we already do for ourselves as a matter of course. So if, for example, we were about to fall off the European grid for electricity, we never form part of the European grid of electricity. If we're to fall off the European mechanisms for the purchase and sale of water, we produce our own water. But insofar as matters which are to be dealt with have had to come under consideration, all of them have come under consideration, and all of them are eventualities that we are ready for. Now, our aim is therefore to ensure that people and businesses can continue to go about their ordinary lives on the 30th of March in the same way as if a hard Brexit, which we all hope doesn't happen, had not happened. And we are ready for that eventuality. And I've said, I think in the evidence I gave to the Select Committee of of the House of Lords that the planning had been done, the implementation would start after the 1st of January next year, if we were then in a situation where there was not yet a deal. Now, having lived through European brinkmanship in the past 6 months, I won't know that there isn't a deal until 11:59 on the 28th of March, I think. But certainly, Mr. Speaker, by the 1st of January, we need to start the implementation process in respect of the planning that we will have done. Then the Honourable Gentleman said that this was a difficult and dangerous time and that we had not involved them in decision-making. Well, I think to be fair to us, in the process of giving the briefings that we've given, we've always asked them whether they think that we should be doing something more. And if I may say so with the very greatest of respect to honourable members opposite, I think Mr. Feetham on occasion has made a number of suggestions, and indeed the Honourable Lady and he and others, I think, have said more than once that the government has done everything possible and left no stone unturned. Now, I appreciate that hyperbole sometimes infects those who are announcing something which they believe is successful, and that success has many fathers, whilst failure is, of course, an orphan. But if you've said that somebody has done everything humanly possible and left no stone unturned, I wonder what it is that they were going to tell us to do that they haven't already said that we have done. But we're open to ideas, of course, as we tell them at the end of every meeting of the Brexit Select Committee. And I want to thank members of the Brexit Select Committee, all of them across the floor of the House, for the work that they have done with us and the understanding that they have brought to the discussions and the useful contributions that they've made in the process of those meetings, and if I may say so, also in some instances outside the course of those meetings, in some of the things that they have said, not about the government, but about how matters should be dealt with. But we don't have a government of national unity. And we didn't think that there was a need for a government of national unity. And I think the fact that the nation continues to prosper and our economy continues to grow demonstrates that we were not in a situation where we should have gone for a government of national unity. And historians, therefore likely the Deputy Chief Minister, will write for themselves in future and determine when the moment of greatest difficulty and danger arose for this community, whether it was after the referendum on the 24th of June 2016, or whether it was during the course of the joint sovereignty campaign pursued by both the governments of the United Kingdom and the government of Spain in 2002 and 2003. If historians conclude that the moment of greatest difficulty and danger was in 2002 and 2003 and not in 2016, then they will ergo also conclude that we did the right thing by not having a government of national unity now that there was not as much danger and difficulty as in 2002, 2003, because they did not have a government of national unity in 2002, 2003, or indeed a joint sovereignty select committee where they might have asked us what we thought. They only heard what we thought in the context of the debates in this House. Mr. Speaker, I do nonetheless think it is a little harsh of him to say there's no ability to influence, because I think they have influence, and Mr. Feetham in particular has put some ideas, as I said, in the context of my earlier discussion. Mr. Speaker, finally, I think the Honourable Gentleman dealt in his final contribution with the issue of the potential second referendum. Now, I have been on record, I think, since July 2016, saying that the terminology of second referendum was, in my view, wrong. I was harshly criticized, I think, by members opposite at the time when I told the Financial Times and other international media that I did not think that there should be a second referendum, because you don't go back and ask the same question again, and that's what you describe as second. If anything, there might be a democratically legitimate opportunity, once a deal had been done about what the future meant, to put that to the people as opposed to the reality of membership of the European Union. That would not be a second referendum, it would be a first referendum, a new referendum on a new issue. Now that you know what your options really are, do you wish to A, stay as you are, B, go to this new status? I don't know whether it's possible to put a third question on the ballot paper, or a third option on the ballot paper. That might be democratically not so valid, and the Electoral Commission might have something to say about that. But my view was very clear in July 2016. I haven't changed my view, but the political reality that this community has to deal with is that that is not an option at the moment. If it were to become an option, and I think Mr. Feetham has said something about that very explicitly in that respect, with which I do not disagree, if that were to become an option, then the position of the government of Gibraltar, and I think the position of this Parliament as a whole, would be that having participated in the 2016 referendum, the people of Gibraltar should, of course, also be included in the franchise for such future consultations. People's vote, as it's now called in the vernacular. Mr. Speaker, I think I've dealt with all matters that the honourable gentleman has raised. I think I've dealt with that already in the context of 2002, 2003.
The Honourable Marlene Hassanon.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to seek clarification on a point, but firstly I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Gibraltar and the UK government for their hard work and solid defence of our people by protecting our sovereignty and constitutional position in the draft withdrawal agreement, as well as the rest of the work they have done and continue doing at this key juncture of Brexit negotiations, which are of course so crucial and vital for the people of Gibraltar. I'm pleased to note the optimism of the Chief Minister and that we are at a stage where the Memorandum of Understanding between us and Spain is reaching its final stages with what looks like a reasonable set of agreements for the future. Of course, Mr. Speaker, we have to remain aware of the reality that we still have to await to see how the withdrawal agreement will be voted on in Parliament, because without the withdrawal agreement passing through Westminster, Mr. Speaker, all of these agreements could well come to nothing, and I therefore sincerely hope this will not be the case. I would like to seek clarification from the Chief Minister regarding Spain's position on discussing the matter of joint sovereignty. Spain has openly talked about the tabling of this issue for future talks or negotiations, so I would like to ask how the Chief Minister will manage this aim of the Spanish government and whether it would stand any chance of impeding a workable deal which benefits both sides of the border. Would that be our own backstop, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Chief Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Lady for her contribution today, and indeed all her contributions when we've debated this issue, and I've updated the House in the time that I have been trying to ensure that the community gets as much of the information on Brexit that we are able to share. I'm sorry that I just quickly needed to read that message coming in. If I may, Mr. Speaker, I think the Honourable Lady is raising a point that the Honourable Gentleman raised in the course of his statement and that I did not deal with. I don't know whether that's what the Honourable Gentleman was pointing out to me. It is absolutely true that the Honourable Lady will have detected, I think, 2 or 3 occasions when some who have current responsibility have said that they will be considering tabling the potential for joint sovereignty in the context of the negotiation of what future arrangements should apply between Gibraltar and the European Union. Well, Mr. Speaker, I have heard it a lot, actually, in the last 3 months, but I've heard it more from those who do not have a responsibility than from those that do have a responsibility. Now, I think this is an important point because the Honourable Lady will know in her work with us in respect to the Brexit Select Committee that the really seminal moment comes when the former Spanish Foreign Minister, Señor Margallo, is moved on by his party, and Alfonso Dastis, until then a career diplomat, in fact, the permanent representative in Brussels of Spain, became the Foreign Secretary of Spain. Señor Dastis moved matters on quite considerably and quite quickly, Mr. Speaker. And he was the one who set out the new Spanish position after Señor Margallo, that the issue of sovereignty would not form part of Spain's claims in the context of the withdrawal agreement. So when they were in a position of responsibility, the Partido Popular through Alfonso Dastis were not pursuing joint sovereignty. I think it is true to say that there are nuances in what they said which limited that position to the stage of withdrawal, not also to the future negotiation. So, Mr. Speaker, I thought the best and clearest position on this was actually put by Spanish State Secretary Marco Aguirreano, who I had the pleasure to meet earlier this week. In a statement that on an interview that he gave last week, when he was pressed as to why they hadn't put joint sovereignty to the Gibraltarians in the context of this discussion. He said, well, look, if we do, we can, but they'll get up and go. And yesterday, in a radio interview, he said that he had been in meetings with the top tier of Gibraltarian representation in the Brexit negotiations, and when asked whether he put the issue of joint sovereignty, he said, look, they would just literally have shut their bags and gone. Well, Mr. Speaker, that is the political reality. And the sooner that everybody in Spain understands that the people of Gibraltar are no closer to accepting the principle of dilution of our sovereignty today than we were in 2002, 2003, a moment of potential greatest difficulty and danger that we may have faced until June 2016, or 1967, when it was last put to us, the sooner then we can move on to a mature and genuine political relationship between neighbors. So, absolutely, it should be clear beyond peradventure to whoever is misguided enough to want to countenance it, that the people of Gibraltar will never pay a sovereignty price. In particular, for something as esoteric as access to a single market. I mean, I don't know that people have not misinterpreted in some ways what our 96% support for remaining in the European Union means. Now, the people of Gibraltar voted 96% to remain in the European Union because we thought that was the best way to defend ourselves against the Spanish sovereignty claim. Not that we are so pro-European, although we may believe in the European project and its ideology, that we are prepared to pay even a sovereignty price to stay in the European Union. That would be the upside-down interpretation of our 96% vote. And so, Mr. Speaker, it heartens me to hear serving politicians of the Spanish government recognize that putting the issue of sovereignty and joint sovereignty is not going to lead to anything other than to negotiations not being able to flourish because the Gibraltarians are not going to engage in it. And I think it helps to evidence where people are in the democratic spectrum when there are others who say that it should be imposed on us. Mr. Speaker, those who seek to impose sovereignties on any others are not playing the democratic game. Now, the conclusions of democratic games can go any way the people want. But the imposition of will, Mr. Speaker, can only go one way as far as I'm concerned. And that is right out the door. And I know that I speak for everyone in this parliament when I say that, and when I say that the government of Gibraltar, whoever might be forming the executive, would never be prepared to countenance any proposal of joint sovereignty that would be put, and that in fact, the sooner we move on from that, the sooner we move on to a good, modern relationship based on good neighborliness.
The Honourable Daniel Feetham.
Mr. Speaker, just one point of clarification. Mr. Speaker, does the Honourable the Chief Minister agree with us that it is important that the United Kingdom hold a line in respect of Article 3 and the definition of United Kingdom which currently includes Gibraltar, and its interplay with Article 184, and that in holding that line, it is important that the United Kingdom government does not agree to any watering down of language that gives Spain hope that it may be able in the future to extort concessions on sovereignty, jurisdiction and control as a price for reaching a permanent deal in respect of Gibraltar and its permanent relationship with the United Kingdom. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, that it is only by the United Kingdom being firm with Spain that Spain will understand that actually, if it really wants to agree something that is of mutual benefit to Gibraltar and the neighbouring region, which can be a very positive, very beneficial agreement, that the only way to do so is, in fact, to park issues of sovereignty, jurisdiction and control. And that today would be a bad time, indeed, to be agreeing to any watering down of language in the current withdrawal agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that's a useful point to clarify the government's understanding of what the state of the texts is. And I think the understanding of governments around Europe is that the withdrawal agreement text is closed. In other words, the Article 3 text and the Article 184 text forms part of the withdrawal agreement, which includes the protocol, and is closed text. And the future framework, the political declaration on the future framework, is also closed texts. And therefore, that there will be no change to the text of Article 3 and the text of Article 184. Now, there may be interpretive notes, there may be declarations, treaties once agreed are immediately the subject of buyer's remorse by one side and the other, and immediately declarations are made about interpretations, etc. I would imagine that that the airwaves are full of discussions about those things at the moment. But as long as the texts are sound, Mr. Speaker, everything else in international law does not have the standard of enforceability that legal text might have. But be that as it may, the provisions of Article 184 are provisions about an agreement to agree, and that is something that the government of Gibraltar believes should be honoured in good faith, and that the best demonstration of good faith that we have seen has been the repeated position of the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who has set out that she is negotiating, from the word go, Mr. Speaker, for the whole of the British family, including Gibraltar. And there were some who doubted whether she would see that through into the withdrawal agreement and Gibraltar's inclusion in the withdrawal agreement. Well, Mr. Speaker, Gibraltar is now included in the withdrawal agreement and in the transitional period. So those who doubted the Prime Minister have at least got that piece of evidence to reassure them that she has stood her ground right the way through to the closing of the text, and we're in the agreement and in the transitional period, as long as there is an agreement and there is a transitional period. We are in there with Britain. And the position that the Prime Minister has set out in relation to the application of 184 and the view of the United Kingdom is that she is negotiating those future arrangements in respect of the whole of the UK family, including Gibraltar, for the benefit of the UK family, including Gibraltar. And I think that is a clear and robust statement of position, which she is now entitled to ask us to be less cynical and less skeptical about. And I think everybody in this House is rightly cynical and skeptical about assurances given to Gibraltar by UK politicians. Theresa May, I think, is one of the few who is entitled to say, I've demonstrated to you that I gave you an assurance and I've seen it through. And she has. Because in this phase 1 and phase 2 period in which we have been engaged, we have had delivered to us the two things that we were assured of. Access to the UK market, phase 1, access to the withdrawal agreement and the transitional period, such as it may be if there is such an agreement by Sunday. And so the Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right, that the best way to create confidence in Gibraltar is for the United Kingdom to be robust in their assurances that it gives Gibraltar and to stand by those assurances. What happens when Gibraltar is confident that the UK has our back is that we're confident in being able to engage in a safe dialogue with our neighbour. And that, Mr. Speaker, helps us to get over the very difficult history that we've had with our neighbour and to demonstrate our, still in relation to our neighbour, skeptical and cynical approach to their approach to negotiations, but to at least demonstrate our willingness to engage in our good faith in trying to reach arrangements which are for the common benefit of all, always with what we might call in our bilingualism the fly behind our ear, that they will then actually perform on the obligations. And always now, and always now, and I think the Honourable Gentleman will agree with me on this, always now, post the Cordoba experience, expensive Cordoba experience, £84 million on an airport, and Spanish pensioners still being paid, right? Something which I've never wished to see stopped. Always now knowing that we must calibrate our performance in a way that plays off continued Spanish performance. So we should not give open-ended commitments to perform obligations which are not linked to Spain performing obligations. Now, all of that, Mr. Speaker, with a robust British Prime Minister behind you who has demonstrated that she does what she says and that she doesn't or wobble at the knees as some others might have done and at the last minute give way, that is what builds confidence and enables us to go forward. And that's what she's done on phase 1, market access to the United Kingdom, and that's what she's done on phase 2, which is the withdrawal agreement and the transitional provision. And a lot of people thought that we would not be in the position that we are today vis-à-vis the support of the United Kingdom. We are there, and I think the Honourable Gentleman has recognised that in the way that he posed his question, for which I'm grateful. And, Mr. Speaker, of course, the best next step in that analysis is for Spain to continue to park matters of sovereignty, jurisdiction, and control in order to be able to advance in areas which are not infected either by our very clear, I'm always impressed by Arlene Foster's way of expressing this, Mr. Speaker, blood red lines on those issues, and indeed on the ingredients of sovereignty, jurisdiction, and control, which are as important as sovereignty, jurisdiction, and control simpliciter, and to be able to engage with us, Mr. Speaker, in a way that enables us to reach the agreements and the arrangements that ordinary people who benefit from cross-frontier movement, whether it's for trade or for personal reasons, to be able to benefit from that. If there is one thing, Mr. Speaker, that I think it is helpful to have had in particular highlighted in the context of withdrawal, not the future, just withdrawal, it is the recognition of the benefit and value to the whole region of freedom of movement in the period of common membership of the European Union. Honourable members will know from their reading of the Gibraltar Protocol to the withdrawal agreement that that is specifically recognised in the UK-EU document, Mr. Speaker. And I think that augurs well for an understanding of the importance of free movement going forward as we negotiate the future arrangements between the United Kingdom and the European Union and what will be of particular benefit in this part of the world. I don't know whether I've dealt with everything that the Honourable Gentleman wanted me to deal with. I'll give way if he wants me to. I'm grateful.
Well, Roy Clinton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to ask the Chief Minister about a very narrow point in relation to the tax treaty, which we discussed briefly last time the House sat. And I note that this time he has, in fact, used the word double tax, or as the sort of things you would see in a double tax treaty. What I'd like to ask the Chief Minister are two things. One, is this treaty capable of surviving or being put into effect in its own right outside a withdrawal agreement? And secondly, or really what I'm trying to say, is it dependent entirely on the withdrawal agreement, or can it exist on its own right, in its own right? And secondly, given that it would survive the 2-year transition period, how long would this tax treaty be for? Does it not have an envisaged end date?
Mr. Speaker, I haven't said that we are entering into a double taxation agreement with Spain, having said that we were not going to. What I've said was that there are tax residency rules which we are dealing with in that agreement of the type found in double taxation and information exchange agreements. So, Mr. Speaker, word precision is important in a parliament where we're discussing our words, Mr. Speaker. So I think it's important that the Honourable Gentleman have a look at the text of my statement when it is published, and he addresses what I've said rather than what he wishes he had heard. Mr. Speaker, the tax agreement is not limited to completion, to drop dead on the 31st of December 2020. I think I made very clear that it was the 4 memoranda that fall dead on that date, because a tax agreement is not something you can put in place in such a short period. You need time to ensure that people are aware of the rules and to be able to make assessments which bring people and their information within the provisions of the agreement. Neither do we wish for there to be a definite period for determination of the obligations under the agreement. We want this to endure, Mr. Speaker. One of the issues that Spain has repeatedly used in the international media against Gibraltar is the issue of taxation, and therefore reaching an arrangement in respect of taxation with Spain is something that we want to see endure, so that that weapon is not available in the past. We genuinely want to have an open and transparent relationship with Spain, as we do with many other nations, none of the others of which are our neighbours, in respect of taxation, so far as it goes to residency rules, etc. So that is one of the agreements that will not end at the end of December, and I think I said so explicitly. I think the Honourable Leader of the Opposition recognised explicitly that I said that the Citizens' Rights Memorandum and the tax agreement were the ones that did not end at the 31st of December.
Any other honourable member wish to raise any question?
Suspension of standing orders, the Honourable the Chief Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move under Standing Order 7.3 to suspend Standing Order 7.1 in order to proceed with government bills.
Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Carried.
Bills first and second reading. A bill for an act to amend the Crimes Act 2011 so as to make certain acts of voyeurism an offence. The Honourable Minister for Health, Care and Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to move that a bill for an act to amend the Crimes Act 2011 so as to make certain acts of voyeurism an offence be read a first time.
I now put the question, which is that a bill for an act to amend the Crimes Act 2011 so as to make certain acts of voyeurism an offence be read a first time. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Carried.
The Crimes Amendment Act 2018.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to move that the bill be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, this bill makes certain acts of voyeurism, commonly referred to as upskirting, an offence in Gibraltar. This highly intrusive practice typically involves offenders taking a picture under a person's clothing without them knowing. This unacceptable practice has seen significant media attention in recent months, especially in the UK, where a campaign was led by victim Gina Martin. Gina was at a music festival in London when 2 men took indecent photographs of her by angling their phone cameras under her skirt when she was distracted. These images were then shared by the men on WhatsApp. Reports suggest that in the UK, there have been 78 cases of upskirting recorded by police since 2005, although they have been prosecuted under other existing offences, such as the offence of outraging public decency. Gina campaigned for upskirting to be specifically made an offence, and a private member's bill was submitted to Parliament. It did not pass its second reading due to an objection by Sir Christopher Chope MP, who, as a matter of principle, objects to all private bills. However, after much outrage, understandable in my mind, the UK Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Theresa May MP, quickly intervened and adopted the measure as a government bill. The UK bill is still working its way through the Houses of Parliament. There is no harm, Mr. Speaker, and I think everything to be gained, to criminalise specifically this vile behaviour. I now turn to the clauses of the bill. Clause 3.2 introduces the offences under a new section 293A, entitled Voyeurism Additional Offences. Subclause 1 makes it an offence for a person to operate equipment underneath a person's clothes without their consent, for the purpose of obtaining sexual gratification or to cause humiliation, distress, or alarm to that person. Subsection 2 sets out a similar offence for recording an image beneath another person's clothing for the same purposes. Subsection 4 stipulates that these offences will carry a penalty on summary conviction of imprisonment for 12 months, or the statutory maximum fine, or both. A conviction and indictment will carry 2 years imprisonment. Clause 3.4 amends Schedule 3 of the Act by adding the new Section 239A to the list of offences. Part 13 of the Act, which deals with the notification requirements and orders in relation to sex offenders, applies to all those offences listed in Part 13, which will now, of course, include the new Section 239A. Mr. Speaker, I commend the bill to the House.
Before I put the question, does any honourable member wish to speak on general principles and merits of this bill?
Yeah, our indication is we're going to support it.
The Honourable Edwin Reyes?
No, just simply to inform the clerk, it is our indication to support the government bill.
Very well. I now put the question. No? Sorry? Oh, yes. My apologies. The Honourable Samantha Sacramento.
Mr. Speaker, attempting to take a photograph underneath a skirt, also known as image-based sexual abuse, is a gross violation of privacy and potentially an act of indecency. And whichever way, this is a form of sexual harassment. This offence, Mr. Speaker, will mainly affect women for obvious reasons, and therefore this law serves to protect women from these circumstances. And as Minister for Equality, I'm pleased to recommend this specific law, which is fit for purpose to combat this phenomenon. The introduction of this new law is good news and is yet another achievement from the equality lens. Mr. Speaker, any form of sexual abuse is an infringement against the rights of women, and as most victims of this act will be women, it constitutes discrimination against women on the grounds of her sex. This new offence serves to enhance the recognition of women's rights to privacy, dignity and sexual expression. We must do everything possible to protect women and girls from sexual offences and ensure that those committing such offences are punished. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I commend the bill to the House.
Is there any other contribution to the second reading of the bill? I will therefore now put the question, which is that a bill for an act to amend the Crimes Act 2011 so as to make certain acts of voyeurism an offence be read a second time. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Carried.
The Crimes Amendment Act 2018.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that the committee stage and third reading of the bill be taken today if all honourable members agree.
Do all honourable members agree that the committee stage and third reading of the bill be taken today?
Aye. Committee stage and third reading. The Honourable the Chief Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to move that the House should resolve itself into committee to consider the following bill clause by clause. The Crimes Amendment Act 2018.
A bill for an act to amend the Crimes Act 2011 so as to make certain acts of voyeurism an offence. Clauses 1 to 3.
Stand part of the bill.
The long title.
Stand part of the bill.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to report that the Crimes Amendment Act 2018 has been considered in committee and has been approved of without amendments. And I move that it should now be read a third time and passed.
Now put the question, which is that a bill for an act to amend the Crimes Act 2011 so as to make certain acts of voyeurism an offence be read a third time and passed. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Carried.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to move that the House should now adjourn to Thursday, the 6th of December at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Mr. Speaker, given what we anticipate will be the timetable of progress at a European level, it is anticipated, but nothing is clear, it is anticipated, that we may be able to see the whole suite of documentation that I've referred to the House should be published either late in the weekend or early during the course of next week. That I should then have an opportunity of letting honourable members have it probably long before that, if I can, by close of business on Friday. I hope to be able to let them have that documentation, and that then there should be a period for the whole community to be able to see the documentation. I expect then, as I've said, to make a ministerial statement and then to come to this House to be able to have the debate in this House, Mr. Speaker, so that honourable members are able to put to the community their views in respect of those documents and what I have said about them in the context of the ministerial statement. So I move that the House should now adjourn to Thursday, the 6th of December at 3 p.m.
House will now adjourn to Thursday, the 6th of December at 3 in the afternoon.